So we're here at Vestavia City Hall.
No, beautiful. It's beautiful in here.
Majestic. Yes. Home of the 8-time state champion Vestavia Hills Rebels, who we never beat in high school, which is a little bit of a sour subject to me, but here we are.
Sorry to hear that, bud.
How you doing today?
Good. It's well, we're knee deep in summer.
Yeah.
It's hot. Everyone's counting down to football. I'm not. Because, football is my season. I will be when it gets, I'm always excited when football season gets here, and I'm always fired up about it, but I will tell you, this is like my off season, and this is when I try to breathe. I will say it's not much of an off season, and of course now raising a young son who's 2, he turns 2 July 4th, so whenever this, airs, he will probably be 2 at that point. But the summertime is when I try to just really be intentional with my time and prepare myself for the chaos that is football season.
But it's coming.
It's coming.
It's almost here.
It's almost here.
Is this like downtime, beach time?
Yeah. We're not making a trip to the beach this year, but we actually spent a little time out in Jackson Hole, doing some work with Big Oak Ranch and On River Time, which is two nonprofit organizations that work with kids, and what a great experience. So my husband and I went out there and got to do Jackson Hole, which is gorgeous. And then we'll go up to Connecticut and visit some family for the holidays. And outside of that, I think I'm pretty much just grounded, play some tennis, enjoy the summer heat, and melt your face off. I think people don't realize when you go out of this area, we were in Jackson Hole and it's 80 degrees. That 80 degrees is 10 times different than this 80
no
degrees.
No doubt.
But I love it. The South, I just love being here.
Yeah. So do you have football in the back of your mind right now? When you're going to really start ramping up and preparing for football?
Yeah, I'll tell you. So, obviously, right now I'm not thinking too much of it. Obviously, I'm reading headlines and things like that, things that come in obviously regarding the season. But when I start to really think about football, you get into fall camp, right? When training camp starts and early August, that's when everybody starts really ramping things up, talking about the biggest changes and what are we going to see from the team, and who your front runners for playoff hopefuls and all that fun stuff. So I try to disengage as much as I can because it can be very consuming. But once August rolls around, that's kind of like when it's like, all right, we're going to start digging our heels in and getting ready and preparing. And of course, Media Days comes up.
Will
right?
you go to SEC Media? I was going to ask you that.
I do not. I used to go to SEC Media Days with AL.com.
Yeah.
And of course, when I worked at CBS 42. So unless I get called and said, hey, we need your assistance, I don't go. I love SEC Media Days though, because it's like the media circuit.
Yeah, and now we're back in Atlanta, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think it's back in Atlanta this year, and of course, we've jumped around and we've been at the Winfrey and all over the place. SEC Media Days though is always fun because you always get the characters of the different coaches, and we would always just kind of like, all right, which coach is going to give us the best line, And it was always usually like a Spurrier or a Les Miles. Lane Kiffin always.
Yeah, Mike Leach.
Mike Leach.
Yeah.
Rest his soul. So it's kind of, that's always a fun time of year. And of course, I'll be kind of pulling on some of the quotes from that and leaning in. But I'll tell you, people always say, well, are you SEC based? And yes, I live here in Birmingham. There was a time when I worked for SEC Nation for 2 years where obviously I was traveling around doing the pregame show. So I was all SEC. But then in 2019, I got moved to games. So I'm now on a game package. So every year I do, I'm with a particular crew. We get assigned a game on a Sunday. We fly out on a Thursday. We cover the game, do all the prep work, whatever. And then rinse and repeat, for 18 to 20 straight weeks. I wish that I was SEC based because I'd be a little closer to home. I feel like I kind of got used to where it's like, okay, if it's 5 hours or less, I'm getting in a car and I'm driving. But, they've kind of had us kind of all over the place. So, doing a lot of Big 12, Big 10 for a while. And I will tell you, as a Rutgers grad, Big 10, I have a place in my heart for the Big 10, especially with Rutgers. But ESPN no longer has the Big 10 package. And it's crazy because last year I was like, what is this going to look and feel like? Well, what it looks and feels like for me, the sideline reporter that's on the sidelines, is it actually has been a bonus in the fact that the weather has been so much better. Because when you were in the Big 10 and it's like late October, it's already freezing. You're already layered up in a million coats. So I will say that's the one thing I get cold really easily. So I enjoy the warm weather. I enjoy late October, early November when you can be out here at a stadium here in the South and, just have a sweater on or, a little windbreaker and you're good to go.
Do you consider yourself a Southerner now?
Yeah. I've always considered myself a Southerner. Let's set the record straight. So I was born in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. However, I was raised in Virginia, Roanoke, Virginia, and then we moved out to the rural parts of Virginia, Newport, Virginia, about 15 minutes from the West Virginia state line. And, some people argue, well, that's not the South. You, Alabamians, argue.
I would probably make that argument.
Yes. Yeah. So you would make the argument. Yeah. But I will say, for me, because I'm very rooted, like I'm a Southern girl. Now, there's differences in like where I grew up and obviously here, the deep South. So I would consider myself for sure a Southerner. My husband as well, who is also from Virginia, but has now lived here for several years. But I've exceeded the decade mark here in Alabama. Yeah. So I feel like I can take that ownership and wear that badge, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is deep South.
Yeah.
Virginia's kind of fringe a little bit.
We're fringe.
So,
yeah. We're fringe, but Southern girl at heart, grew up that way, and we just love it here.
Yeah.
Like people have asked us, well, do you ever think you'll move and go elsewhere? I can't imagine not living in Alabama.
Yeah, it's a great place. Birmingham's a great town.
We love it.
Yeah.
We've just kind of got rooted here. I'll say this for me and my job, obviously traveling around, getting on a plane out of this Birmingham airport, 10 times easier than any major airport like Atlanta, Dallas, Charlotte. I would so much rather just puddle hop over to Atlanta and then dart over to wherever I'm going. So much easier.
I'd drive to Alaska if I could.
You're a driver.
I absolutely drive. Yeah, I have no interest in getting on a plane. It's just me. I'm weird like that. But
okay.
I'm glad you enjoy it.
Okay.
Most people know you as a sideline reporter, but your professional life is much broader than that. I mean, you've written a book. You talk a lot about grief. You do a lot of public speaking. What drives you to do all these things?
It is crazy because I feel like that Rolodex of life skills just keeps adding up, and I think that's just what happens as we get older. We get thrown a lot of curveballs, things that we don't expect. And, I certainly feel like life has gone off script many times for me, like most people. But I'm grateful for the journey. And, really for me, it has been about finding my voice and being a voice for other people that feel they've been silenced. And that one thing that I think that tends to silence people is shame. And that really is rooted in my story and the loss of both of my parents, which I know we'll dive into. But helping people to find that voice. And really a lot of that came as I entered into the world of sports broadcasting, because my job is essentially being a professional storyteller, right? Telling the stories of the coaches and the athletes and the fans that make it more than a game. And so my goal is to tell those stories and to give them a voice and shed light on their stories, because you see this ripple effect. You see this impact that happens when someone's story comes to light, and you see just this resilience and the perseverance. And really it just gives people hope to say, okay, they did it, so can I. Mm-hmm. And, that was lost on me for many years as I was navigating my own story and the shame of that. But really that's kind of become my mission, is to be a voice and to help others find their voice.
Is this professional life that you've put together? Is this something that you envisioned and dreamed about when you were a kid, or is this something that has come about where your relationship with ESPN has kind of opened those doors for you? Yeah,
I will tell you, unlike most people, so I feel like really when people talk about, well, what was your path to ESPN? And it looks different for everybody. There's no real like one way. And of course we live in a different world with digital and social media and all these different things, so things have evolved over the course of time. But I will tell you this, which is, crazy. A lot of people that are in my field of broadcasting, they're young, 3-4 years old. I want to be on TV. I want to be a broadcaster. I want to call games, And so they're up there, sitting on grandpa's lap, play by play. Mm-hmm. And it's so crazy because for me, my actual childhood dream was to be a sports doctor. So I wanted to be a sports doctor because as an athlete that had experienced so many challenges and so many setbacks, I felt like, this would be an opportunity for me to help athletes get back out on the field and play. And I felt like I could empathize with that.
And you were a volleyball player growing up, right? Is it big time?
Gymnastics.
Hey. That's what I meant to say.
But you know why you said volleyball? It's because almost everybody says that. Because I am 5'9", y'all. Way too tall.
You didn't play volleyball at all?
No, only in gym class.
Okay.
But I'm entirely too tall to be a gymnast. So when people see me, they always say basketball or volleyball. That's what they peg me for. But I was a gymnast my whole life. And really, again, as an athlete, that was my dream. And so, being a sports doctor was the other dream. And it's actually crazy because I even reference this in my book is that, my mom used to always, she's going to be on ESPN one day. And it's crazy because when that was being said, it was kind of talking more about the gymnastics career and the performing and that. And it's crazy how it's come full circle because, yes, I'm on ESPN, but in a different capacity now. Mm-hmm. And it's just so cool that, life happens. And, for me, making that change, I think a lot of times we get stuck in this mindset of okay, this is my goal. I want to be this. And in times I felt like if I don't pursue being a sports doctor, it's a failure, right? But what do I know at 5 years old now being, as I obviously progress through college and obviously grow, what I knew at 5 is completely different at what I know at 20 years old. And so, making that transition, obviously, there's a lot that goes into it, with my family story. But I'm so grateful that I landed here and had the resources and the people behind me to encourage me along the way because it has not been an easy path. And it takes a lot of commitment, hard work, dedication, grinding. I mean, it's not the glamorous job that most people think it is. When you talk about, oh, cool, I'm covering college football, getting paid to travel and do all this. It's awesome. But it does come with a price. And that price is, leaving my family 4 days out of the week. My poor husband's at home with my 2-year-old trying to figure out, okay, he's not eating tonight and calling me with all these things and juggling. And, he's got his own roofing business and he's trying to manage his business while I'm out here doing my thing. And so it creates chaos, but at the same time, we just figure it out. We make it work.
You talk a lot about embracing your story, and that's difficult for me sometimes. And there's a lot of people out there that have had a lot of bad things happen to them. And it's easy to embrace the good things that have happened in your life, but why should we also just embrace the entirety of our story?
Yeah, I think that, something I've really leaned into just in my journey is, we obviously have this storybook of life, right? And, these chapters of our story. And there's the beautiful chapters, the ones that make us laugh and that make us sing and praise. And then there's those messy ones. And we all want to kind of rip those out, toss them in the trash, because those are the ones that we're ashamed of. We don't want people to see. We don't want people to read. We don't want to let people into that part of our world. But what I've realized in this process is that the messy chapters are especially the ones that shape us and make us who we are, make us more resilient, and really provide the gifts that lead us to our purpose. And I think that's where I've grown in so many ways in finding my purpose is through the hardships, through the messy chapters. Because I think a lot of times society and life tells us that we're defined by our hardest chapter. But really, it's not being defined by, it's being refined. And being refined by our hardest chapter. If we are able to take that, make that choice to use it for good, to find our purpose, to find joy, to build resilience, we're going to go places. Mm-hmm. So that's what my encouragement to other people is.
See, I just have a hard time when I think back to, some of the decisions I've made and some of the bad things that I've done in my life, just thinking how did you get so far off track? And I don't want this to be a counseling session by any means, but
we're unpacking it all here. Yeah, we're unpacking it all.
But honestly,
this is pulling the curtains back.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really struggled with that, because I was saved when I was 16 years old, and then I went to junior college for a couple of years, and then I went to Mississippi State, and I really got off track at that point, and just made some very, very poor decisions. And there was about a decade of my life where I was completely away from God, and, and just not going to church, not doing the right things, just living a secular lifestyle. Well, I mean, I really have a hard time when I look back on that, understanding that the Lord is, he was working through all that. And again, I mean,
He's sharpening you during that time.
He was. But again, I still, just going back to your point, I live with a lot of shame from that era, that I don't want to embrace the fact that that is part of my story. And so I have a hard time with that, and I think
it's like you just want to cut that piece out, put it on a shelf, exactly. Right? Forget about it.
Yeah.
Burn it in the fire.
Yeah. I don't have a question. It was more of a statement, but
no, and I appreciate that, and I think that's why these conversations are so important, because everyone lives with shame. Mm-hmm. Shameful pieces of their story, things that happen, choices they make, things that are maybe way beyond their control, but that shame will creep in. And guess what? Shame thrives in isolation, and it pulls you into the darkness. That's what it wants you to do. That's what the devil wants you to do. But you've got to pull those things into the light, because I truly believe that when you can start embracing and owning those shameful things, I literally just had this vision of these shackles of shame that are just literally tied to my wrist. And when I finally decided to start owning those things, I was able to say, okay, here we go.
And this is where the Lord brings about your greatest ministry, like you were saying. A lot of times, he takes that mess and turns it into a ministry, and I see that. But there's other people that they live with shame of something that they didn't do. It was done to them, or it was something that happened that was not of their own choosing.
And then that snowball effect, that spiral happens.
Yeah.
Because then we're led to believe that in some way it was our fault, or we did something to deserve that, right?
I've heard stories of people that get kids that got yelled at when they were a kid, like a parent yelled at them and overreacted to something, and they're still dealing with that in adulthood. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but, just things like that where, it's no fault of their own, but they're still living with that sort of shame. You see a lot of that?
You do. And I think that's where our especially in adolescence, where we're being completely, we're being molded every single day. And I think that's why it's so important as we lean into development. Because, our brains aren't fully developed till we're 25 years old. And I think a lot of the things we experience, whether it's, actions taken against us, bullying, substance use, all those things can start to mount up. Mm-hmm. And as you're developing and growing, that then becomes part of who you are and ingrained and in your wiring. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's why it's so important to have these conversations. And that's why I think it's so important to unpack these things. Because a lot of times people, the whole idea of going to see a therapist, counselor, oh, so shameful. Can't do that. Can't admit to that. But when I tell you, I was actually just texting with my therapist before this, getting my next appointment set up. Having those conversations from just ground level, being able to unpack the things, why am I the way I am? And it's so important to have those conversations, because you're able to better understand why you are the way you are. And it helps you to operate in relationships better. For me, in my marriage, how I raise my son, how I operate in friendships, relationships with family. Because let's be real, everything's dysfunctional, y'all. You know that, right? There's dysfunction everywhere. And if you think that you're the only family or the only person that's dealing with the dysfunction, you're wrong, because we're all in it together, right?
We don't post that dysfunction on social media. So when we're scrolling, we see all the happy beach pictures and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Behind the scenes, we don't really understand what's going on. For me, it was just going back to what you're saying. I mean, I think it is vitally important to have counseling in your life, and but for me, I just coped with the trauma in such bad ways, through alcohol and just other things, and casual sex. I'll be honest, things that was the way that I coped with it, through pornography and so unlearning those behaviors and learning better behaviors, and part of dealing with that trauma has been through counseling and therapy that I've had to go through.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of mental abuse that occurred with me in my childhood, and I didn't seek any kind of counseling or therapy for years and years and years. And that's just the way I coped with it. and I'm thankful that I survived.
Well, and I think that first of all, it's bold for you to speak that, right? Because a lot of people are just so afraid to name those things, right? But we're all trying to get to the other side and figure out how can we feel better, how can we operate, with more joy and find more purpose. But also, a lot of times we want to operate the way we want to operate, right? And we forget that, oh, by the way, here's God, and He's got a plan for us. And sometimes our plan and His plan looks entirely different. And I think that sometimes we kind of just have to pull back and speaking of like social media, we live in a world of instant gratification where we want everything to happen right now. Right now. Give it to me now. And with technology and everything else that we're living with, I mean, it's insane. But what I think about is, and you could probably speak to this, there is a commitment to find healing, right? It takes work. Mm-hmm. And some people just don't want to put in the work. Either they're ashamed of it, or they just don't have the time. They don't put the energy into it to put in the work. Mm-hmm. Like, I would not be where I am today if I would not have worked for years and years and years and years and years. And let me tell you, it's not linear. It's not like, ooh, straight shot. Yeah. We are like, woo, 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 ping pong and all over the place.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree 100%. A lot of people just want the Lord to just wave a magic wand and just take this away from them. Mm-hmm. But I found out that in most instances, He's not going to. Mm-hmm. He wants you to come alongside Him and put the work in, to be able to overcome that.
And especially when things are good, right? And not just when things are in a struggle. When things are good, it's the gratitude and being able to see, because to me, when you walk through the struggle, gratitude on the other side blossoms. Mm-hmm. And it can be so much greater because you've walked through the trenches and gone through the things, and that appreciation for life and the value that you place on life can be so much more vast, having walked through some of the challenges that life presents.
And you do it for yourself, but I mean, if you're in a marriage, I mean, you do it for your family.
Yep.
If you've got kids, I mean, that's the thing with me is I don't want to put trauma on my kids. I had trauma that was put on me, through no fault of my own. Now I have to, own and take responsibility for my actions at some point.
Right.
But I don't want to put trauma on. So the least amount of trauma that I can put on my children and put on my wife. And I've had to do a lot of work, to be able to overcome a lot of those disadvantages that I had, growing up. So, I want to move on to the next point, and you and I we're in a club together. We've both of us have lost our parents. You lost your parents at a young age. I mean, I guess you're 18, right?
18.
Okay,
Yep.
You lost both your parents. I lost my dad in 2011, and I lost my mom in 2021. So, you've got a question about something. How was I at 3? You lose that. So, for you, how did that affect you?
Yeah.
I know that's a loaded question, but
no. It is crazy because you talk about memories, right? And you have all these this memory bank of things you remember as you grow, and those are the memories that you want to continue sharing with those people. And I will say now, as I've welcomed my son into the world, not having my parents here has been very challenging. Because I look around me and I think, I'm so grateful for my auntie and Uncle Mike who stepped in when my parents died. My in-laws, my husband's parents were actually just visiting with us, and just seeing the love that they're pouring into Mason. But then there's that little kind of ache in my heart of what would it be like if my parents were here now? What would it be like if they were here to share in this moment? Because I'll tell you, growing up, my mom wanted nothing more than to be a wife and a mom. She did everything. I mean, it was the white picket fence set up for her in her mind. It was I'm going to work part-time. I'm going to raise my children. I'm going to do everything I can to provide for myself and my older brother, Alan. And, that's how she operated. My dad went to work, he worked full-time, and he was still obviously very involved in our lives. And I will say that is something that I'm very fortunate for. When I think about circumstances and having been with different kids, Even I just mentioned most recently being with the kids at Big Oak Ranch, and, experiencing this, fly fishing excursion, with On River Time, knowing where these kids had come from and understanding a little bit about their story and, reflecting on my own childhood. I was so fortunate to have parents that loved my brother and I unconditionally, lifted us up when we were down, applauded us in our successes. We're literally just there every single day, pushing us, encouraging us. And was it perfect? Absolutely not. But having that foundation was huge for us. And so when the rug was ripped out, 18 years old, I'm at Rutgers, studying for exams, living my dream as a collegiate gymnast. And not just my dream. That was a dream that I had, but also my parents had that dream for me. And so I'm living out our dream. And I get that phone call from my dad to let me know my mom had died. And it just came as a complete shock because I just talked to my parents on the phone. We just had a conversation. Everything seemed normal. My mom's 45 years old. It's the middle of the night. He calls to tell me that my mom died. And I was like, what? I don't understand. And he said, I can't explain it now. Get on the next plane you can. I'll be at the airport to pick you up. So 18-year-old me, scrambling around, packing my bags, didn't even have $50 in my bank account, had to borrow my roommate's emergency credit card and book the flight home. I get home, and my uncle and my cousin show up instead to let me know that my dad, too, had passed away. And so as I sit in the backseat of that car, learning the news that not only my mom had died, but now my dad's passed away as well, it's like my entire world was just like flipped upside down. And when I say like these are the two people that my best friends I love more than anything, literally until the day that I left for college, would tuck me at night. We would say our prayers. We would talk about, faith and determination and hard work and all those things that would lead me places. And that encouragement came from them until the day that I left for college. And, most kids when don't get me wrong, I had brat tendencies. I'm a girl. We're all, we can all be brats at times. And I will fully own that. I put my mom through the ringer at times. But to have that love and support, and up until the day that I left for college, I wasn't running away from my parents being like, oh, I don't want to be around you. You're not cool. Like, we just spent so much good quality time together. And even looking back now, there's times where I'm like, man, like, I wish I would have done more. I wish I could have spent more time with them. It's never enough. Mm-hmm. Because when you lose the ones that you love, life is so short. Mm-hmm. And time is non-refundable. And that's something I've learned in this journey, in this process, is that you don't get that back. And so I have been trying my very best to live my life in a way that is super intentional and being in the moment, because just like that, it goes.
But how do you start to heal from that? I mean, you didn't talk about it for a long time.
Yeah.
So how do you eventually start to, again, going back to what you said, embrace the whole of your story and then start to heal on the inside from losing your parents?
Yeah. So, the biggest reason I didn't talk about it for a long time was because my parents died of prescription drug overdoses. And they were going to a pain management doctor in Roanoke, Virginia, seeking help for the chronic pain they were experiencing. My mom had degenerative disc disease. My dad had chronic back pain and, also struggled with PTSD from his service in the military. And, it's crazy because even the headline in the newspaper shortly after they passed away, the subtitle basically reads, "Parents likely died of an overdose." And yet I couldn't even take that article and believe it as truth. Because in my mind, my parents aren't addicts. Could never use the word addiction or overdose in the same sentence as both my parents. Because what does society tell us about addiction? It puts us in a box, puts a label on us. You're uneducated, you're a terrible person, you make bad choices, you're dysfunctional, all the things. And, my parents were loving, compassionate, joyful people that got sucked under by the prescription drugs they were taking. It was OxyContin, eventually into fentanyl is what they were being prescribed. And, they were taking it as prescribed until eventually they weren't, because they started abusing it because it was the only thing that got them out of bed in the morning. And yet it was like they were living this double life, because on the outside, we just, wow, like they're functioning at a high level, like they're doing as they're told, they feel better, things are fine, we're going to church every Sunday, we're going to gymnastics practice, we're going to all the Allens, sporting events, whatever. And then this happens. And so for years, when I say like I ran, my best friend for 7 years didn't know how my parents died. Because I literally just told that sugar-coated story. I latched onto this, well, what happened to your parents? Mom died of respiratory failure. Dad died of a heart attack. Doesn't that sound like when someone says that to you, you know, if you know nothing about addiction, you're probably not going to be like, that's weird. That's strange. You're not going to equate the two. And so I latched onto that because I could not physically and emotionally come to grips and say out loud that my parents were addicts or that my parents died of overdose. And so it took years to get to that place, years to be able to sit in this chair and openly talk about them and their story in a way that, you know, I felt like their legacy was up to me to preserve that at all costs. And it's crazy because now as I sit here 22 years after they've passed away, like I feel their legacy is brighter than ever. And, you know, they became victims of this horrible opioid crisis that our country is facing. Yes, they had to make choices, but a lot of things were dealt to them, and you know, they had to do what they had to do to survive. Mm-hmm. And so I love them just for that, for doing the very best they could to survive under the circumstances that they were given.
Did you start to heal once you started to tell the whole of the story? Is that kind of when the healing started?
Yeah. So I talk about the shackles of shame. You know, I have to give credit to my auntie Linda, my mom's sister, because yeah, I was 18 when my parents passed away. I was still a baby, y'all. So like, I mean, total child, didn't even know how to write a check. How am I going to survive this? And so my auntie Linda and my uncle Mike really stepped in and kind of like pushed me along, encouraged me, nudged me, did whatever they could to help me continue going and not to give up. But really over the course of several years, I just built up these walls. And when I say like angry, like my auntie Linda would try to lovingly share their story. And it might just be with, you know, someone at the grocery store or someone that we knew. Mm-hmm. You'd have thought, like, I just went, like, into rage. You're attacking them. That's not true. No. And so it was years of that cycle, and I just couldn't break it. And so finally, over the course of time, in the most loving way she possibly could, was like to break down those walls and to help me see. And I say this a lot when I, you know, speak at different events and stuff, is that, you know, my parents aren't defined by how they died, but by how they lived their lives. And ultimately, she helped me to see that and to embrace that and recognize that now it's not about just preserving their legacy, it's about building my own. And when I started to be able to speak out and share it, and hey, one-on-one, we're sitting, you know, at a coffee shop or with a best friend in my living room, and then starting to share more openly in different groups, recognizing that freedom that came from that, I mean, it's just been like exonerating. Mm-hmm. I use that word exonerated because, like, what a word, right? Like, I was imprisoned to my shame. Oh.
I had a mini epiphany the other day. I have these, sometimes I have a mini epiphany.
You seem like an epiphany kind of guy.
Well, mini, not the full Monty.
But I just feel like you.
Well, I mean, I am a thinker. Okay. You know, from time to time. But I was sitting. I was sitting in my anger the other day, and I had this. I feel like the Lord just opened up the veil and gave me something that I thought was incredible, because nobody talks about this. Mm-hmm. You don't ever hear anybody talking about this. Yeah. That need to be understood. And I think that's why I sit in my anger sometimes. Mm-hmm. You know, because I just want people to understand where I'm coming from, understand my story, understand what my intentions are.
You want to be seen.
Yeah, to be seen. You know, people do talk about that a lot. I want to be heard. I want to be seen. But I think even more so, you know, and I think this is why this is so important with respect to relationship, and you know, from a marital standpoint, from a child standpoint, the need to be understood. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think that's why that ties into me losing my parents, is because, like, you know, going back to, you know, when I was a kid, they knew you, from day one. When you came into this world, your parents knew you. They saw you grow up. They understood you. And I think sometimes when I get into my feelings and I get my feelings hurt, all I want is for other people to understand me.
Yeah.
Is that something that you've thought a lot about, and how important do you think that is to somebody's mental health?
I think that's such a great point, because here's what happened, and I've been trying to unpack this for a little while, so we're going to unpack this together.
Let's unpack. Yeah.
Okay, so there's this idea of being inward facing, right? When you're inward facing, that means like you're putting everything on yourself, and some people will call that narcissism, right? When you're inward facing and everything's about you and whatever. But also you can be very inward facing when you start to play the blame game and you put the blame on yourself. Well, I could have done this. I could have done that. I should have done more. If I would have asked more questions, maybe my parents would still be here. Maybe the overdoses wouldn't have happened. Maybe they would have gone and gotten treatment. Like, there's so many things. And what you're doing is, in reality, you're self-sabotaging. And so in a lot of ways, you're being selfish because you're pushing everything on yourself. When, first of all, we know that we don't have control over a lot of things in this life, right? And so you have to just give it up to the God or a good Lord above. And, I think about just kind of what you're talking about is like being seen and being heard, which I think is obviously a big part of this, is like, how can you be heard? How can you be understood? And, I think that a lot of times, we just have to be willing to like let go of the things that we have absolutely no control over. But then also, maybe you made a decision 10 years ago that you're like, gosh, this just like wrecked my life. This just changed the course of my life. But guess what? We're 10 years down the road now. You can't go back and undo that. But you can also take what you've walked through, what you've gone through, and recognize, like, you're now 10 years down the road. Let's not take 10 steps backwards. Let's use this now to take 10 steps forward and continue to grow in using that. Because we're all going to make mistakes. And again, that's what shapes us. And I think that's why we have to walk through this life not completely just destroying our inner selves. Because if you're self-sabotaging, you want to be seen and understood. But also, too, how much do you understand yourself? How much are you reflecting on what's going on in your world? And at the end of the day, and this is something I've also realized, is that, as much as you want people to understand you, you're never, put 100 people in a room and you go make a statement. Not everybody's always going to agree with you. And so, you really, in a lot of ways, have to kind of pick your battles. But I think ultimately you have to be confident and love yourself, the good with the bad, to be able to use that now to push that out to the world and to be seen. And again, know that rejection's coming. You're not always going to be accepted by everybody. But even if you just change one person's life, even if this podcast right here that you've decided to do helps one person, wow, I heard that episode with so-and-so, if that makes the difference. And I think that's where you have to start kind of readjusting that mindset. Because again, I do think that a lot of times we put so much on ourselves, and whether it's in a narcissistic way or in a self-sabotaging way.
But I think it's important also, if you're in a relationship, like for me to be able to understand where my wife is coming from, because she wants to be understood. She wants to be seen and heard and understood. And so I think as human beings, we're made for relationship, and I think that's we're made for intimacy and connection, and those are the things that and part of that is me understanding myself, but it's also me understanding my significant other. Again, when my kids are going through something, to try to understand where they're coming from, and I think one of the things that bothers me sometimes is that, like, I just want people to see my motives and intentions, that they're not bad. Yeah. I may not respond, the way I need to every time, but and maybe that's my narcissistic tendencies. I've done that I've always got these great motives and intentions, but I do want people to understand where I'm coming from. But it's also important for me to understand where they're coming from too. And I think that's where we're missing people.
Well, it's the giving and receiving, right? Yeah. So I get what you're saying here. So I kind of see where
it's a two-way street.
It's a two-way.
But we're not doing that as a society.
Yeah.
We're so social media focused, and things are so impersonal. we don't want to listen to somebody else's point of view. We just dismiss them, and I don't want to get into a political discussion or anything like that. But I mean, it's like, when somebody gets on the other side of the aisle, and there's a lot of people that are on the other side of the aisle, on a wide variety of issues. We don't want to lean into that and try to understand where somebody else is coming from. We dig our heels in, and we have our point of view, and we don't want to embrace another perspective that may be diametrically opposite of what we're going through.
Well, and I think that's actually something I've unpacked a lot with my therapist, Neely, and living in a world, because I will say I do get fearful at times because, having an opinion and let's even take politics out of it, right? Even if it's an opinion about a quarterback or a player, or if this coach should have benched this person. Okay. Like, I could get out there and give my opinion. Well, someone else on the other side is going to have another opinion. And I think it's great to have an opinion, but there's times where I get fearful that, like, if I let my opinion be known, then there's always going to be a rebuttal. And then that's where rejection comes in, right? You get rejected, and then you get people that are going to side with that person and this person. But what I've learned is, like, we do live in a society that you got to pick a side, either or, right? But that's not the way it's supposed to be. And there's this area in between where we can sway back and forth in this gray area. It doesn't have to be black or white. Let's live in the gray where we have the ability to listen and learn and grow and see both points of view and say, well, I operate on this track and this is what I think about this, but I also can see your point of view and, hey, maybe let me try that out. Let me see how that goes. Right. And I think that is where, when you talk about being seen in relationships, that's what makes things super complicated, right? Because you could live in a world where your friend group, everybody you live with, every family member, you try to put yourself in alignment, everything that you believe in, everything you feel. That's impossible. That's never going to happen. You're not going to have, but that's what makes relationships unique. And I'll just use the example of me and my husband. We operate in different quadrants, right? Our personalities, like, you do all these like different tests or whatever in relationships, conflict resolution. We're not in the same quadrant at all. So, like, here's the key now is to understand if I'm in this quadrant and he's in this quadrant. I can literally see like the diagram in my head. We did this at the marriage conference at Church of the Highlands, and it's now understanding the conflict resolution of that. So how do you fight your fights, right? And it's how do I become seen and heard and allow my significant other to become seen and heard? And I think that also takes a lot of work. And it also takes lay down your arms, and be humble for a moment. It's very humbling.
One of my counselors said to do two things: be kind and curious.
Yeah.
Like if you hear something from a spouse, and a lot of times I will take that as like some sort of attack. Like the tone comes at me kind of hard, or maybe it doesn't. And I just going back to the way I've dealt with trauma throughout my entire childhood, and sometimes I feel like when that comes toward me, it's an attack. But being able to be kind and then also curious, asking questions. Now I'm perceiving that you're, so you're asking.
So what do you actually mean by that statement? Right. Let's dig into.
What do you actually mean by your opinion?
Yes.
Right.
But no, I think that's so good and such a big part of this conversation, because relationships are so important. And this is where we have I think we never stop learning and growing in that department, right? Of how to operate. But I will say, as people get older, everyone always says, like, as people get older, they get a little bit more like bitter, or they're more stuck in their ways and they can't be changed. And it's like, okay, let's peel the layers back here a little bit more. And, but you have to have two parties that are willing to work at it. Like, if you're the one telling your wife that be kind and curious, she's not returning the favor, then it can be hard. And so I think that's where you really have to just lean into those conversations. And even my husband and I, there's been I will say this, and this kind of goes along with the topic of addiction. He had not experienced addiction. And so when he was navigating, came into my life many years after my parents passed, but having to share with him what had happened and to better help him to understand what addiction is and what led them down that road, versus it just being simply like, oh, like they died of overdoses, and then he starts maybe having the perception of what society tells of an addict, helping him to understand it, because I now work in a world where I'm helping addicts. I'm helping people that are struggling, with addiction and shame and those things, and walking through that with them and helping him to understand. And it's really been a journey and a process. So I think that it just requires work and both parties to buy in, to putting in the work to better understand one another.
Yeah, no doubt. When I think about, and I call them negative emotions. I'm sure there's some scientific term for them, but when I think about negative emotions like anger, resentment, bitterness, frustration, anxiety, I think that where we have to put in a lot of work is combating those and getting rid of a lot of those things. But also something you said that was very, very interesting was talking about grounding. And I know that's a counseling term, a therapeutic term about grounding, and I want to get a little bit lighter here for a second.
I think I know where you're going.
Yeah, you know where I'm going. So you mentioned that the sideline shimmy, your dancing on the sideline kind of came out of nervousness and anxiety. So when you're dealing with, and anxiety can bear itself out in a lot of different ways, but like when you're dealing with anxiety, and I can relate to that a lot because I had such a fear of public speaking, and even now, I mean,
but look at you now.
Well, I mean, but I'm still.
You're a beautiful flower. You're doing it.
I still deal with it.
You better not cut that part out.
Yeah, beautiful flower. Thank you. But I still deal with it. I don't know that I've got grounding techniques. But for you, your dancing sort of bore out of that anxiety. Tell me how all that came about.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is totally a therapy term. And I'll be honest. Okay, we're being real here. When I used to hear people talk about like meditation and breathing exercises and grounding, I was like, oh, that's some voodoo magic.
Right.
Come on. Like I wasn't into it. Like whatever. But it's crazy as I've started to want to learn more and understand the foundation of where I came from and why I'm here and why I'm responsive. My responses are what they are. Where it really kind of manifested was, I do all this preparation. I get ready for this game, and I am just like open book here, like just But it's like crazy because it's like all of a sudden it's like the lights would come on, and it was go time. And I felt so prepared. I knew exactly. I mean, all my notes. I mean, I was more than prepared. And all of a sudden, it's just then like, okay, we're 2 minutes from air, and it still happens, y'all. Okay, 2019. I've been working for ESPN since 2016, so national level TV, and it still happens. As soon 2 minutes from air, my heart starts racing, and it's the weirdest thing because I'm like, okay, we're 2 minutes to air. Like my heart's racing now talking about it. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, like what's going on here? It's like my body starts to take over, and it's the excitement, and it's not necessarily like, it's nerves, but it's not just bad nerves. It's good nerves. It's adrenaline. And where it takes me back to is my days of gymnastics. And I'll tell you, that was one thing when I retired from gymnastics. I was like, there's no way I'm ever going to replicate this. When the judges salute you, your heart's pounding, it's ready to go. You stand up, you get ready for that first, tumbling pass or whatever, event that I'm on. But live TV has almost replicated that for me on some level. And so when I feel that heart start to pound 2 minutes before kickoff, I used to just be like a nervous wreck and like look at it as a bad thing. Oh my gosh, nobody else gets nervous. Why is it just me? Everybody else seems so confident and calm and all the things, and I'm over here just having a total meltdown. So I would start just moving my body, like obviously like the guys are running out of the tunnel, the band's playing, fans are cheering, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, and my heart's just racing. And that's when I realized, like, immerse yourself. Don't try to escape this. Be in it. And that's where the sideline shimmy was born, because I just started dancing, and instead of my nerves just being right here where I'm about to talk, I mean, literally at times you could see the mic doing this. And it almost felt like it was an out-of-body experience, because I'm like, I can't control this. Like, I know exactly what I'm going to say, but I'm nervous as heck, and I don't know why. And so the dancing just really helped me to push that nervousness through my body. And so it's not that I'm not nervous, but I've now been able to use the nerves for something good and to feel that adrenaline and really be in the moment more. And so the dancing really just kind of helped me to find that. And then it became a viral sensation because little did I know that in the world of TV, especially when we're out preparing for games, I always thought that like when we're counting down, like, okay, the cameras are coming on, everything's live. Oh no, cameras are like live 3 hours before kickoff. So if anybody in the stadium thinks they're going to go do something crazy and not be caught on camera, of course we have cell phones now, but literally all the cameras stationed around, they're recording at all times. And so I would be dancing like silly. We're about to rehearse. So we usually rehearse about 15 minutes before kickoff, 20 minutes before kickoff. And I would just be rehearsing, whatever, and just dancing like a fool. Well, they're recording the whole time. So I had no idea. And someone sent me, I have to give El Habel the shout out for that. Because she sent me this video. She's like, hey, I got this. And my producer back at ESPN thought I was going to be embarrassed. He's like, don't send that to her. She's going to be so embarrassed. Little did he know. It takes a lot to embarrass me. But I'm dancing like an idiot. And the first time it came alive was on the Boise State blue Smurf turf. I was in a red jacket, and I'm sitting here just doing this stupid dance. And I posted it on social media, and it became a viral sensation, and here we are. So, like, every game, it's just become my thing. I always find a good song to jive to and put it on social media, and there we go.
You know, and for me, it's always the lead up. You know, I just remember there was one time I was writing for Saturday Down South, and they wanted me to come on the Fine Bob show.
Okay.
And I was like pacing. You know, I mean, I was like going back and forth. I was like, you know, diving into scripture. I'm like trying to find Bible verses that help me with fear and things like that. But it's always the lead up. Right before you're about to go on, you're almost in like freak out mode.
Yeah.
But then once I get going, I'm fine.
You're fine.
You know.
And then afterwards, you feel like you're up here and you're about to crash.
Yeah,
right? On the adrenaline high. Yeah.
And then you look back on it and you go, why was I even worried about that? You know. Yeah. But for me, I think the root of that is there's a fear of humiliation. You know, and I going back to my childhood, and I know we've gone back to that a lot today, but you know, I just feel like there's just like fear of messing up or like fear of humiliation that I'm going to say something or not say something or just like completely go blank, you know, and I think if you can overthink everything.
Well, I would say this, you've probably gotten really good at producing stuff in your head. And that is something that my boy Ryan back here behind the camera will have to attest to as well, is that it is really easy, especially when you work in this field and you're doing all this. It's so easy to produce in your head. And that's where I have to shut it down. Like in this instance, or if, you know, I'm doing an interview or they're asking me the questions versus me asking the questions. Like I've got to not produce it in my head because sometimes I produce it in sound bites where I'm like, ooh, okay, let me think. Okay. All right. Oh, that was a perfect sound bite. Like I do it like I'm editing it. Whereas, first of all, we have the ability to edit this. But to your point, then you can go back 1,000 times. Well, I should have said this. I should have done that. I mean, I did the same thing. Even when I released my book, we did, you know, Good Morning America, and we did all these things in New York City. And, you know, you get like 3 minutes. Ooh, it goes quick. And, you know, I finished up and I felt like it went great. I was also very nervous, just like you said. But I thought it went great. But in my head, I kept questioning, like, oh, well, maybe I should have spent more time here. Maybe I should have done this. Or, oh, and then almost in a way, like rehearsing. Yeah. Well, if I had to do it over again, right, how would it go? What would I say? How would I do it differently? And it's like, no. Like, just be in the moment and enjoy what just happened. Enjoy that 3 minutes that I just provided and let it be. Like, you just got to let it be.
You know, I learned something incredible from my son the other day. My son, he's 6. His name's Joshua. And he is, like, reading everything now. I mean, it's amazing. Like, he was having a hard time. And then, like, all of a sudden, it just, like, exploded. I mean, he's reading probably at a 3rd or 4th grade level.
Wow,
but he does mess some words up from time to time. It's hilarious. And so we were driving the other day, it was just me and him, and we were going by this feed and seed store. And he said, Daddy, what is supply? And I said, what? He goes, what's supply? I said, supply. It was feed, seed, and supply. And I said, Joshua, it's supply. And he started dying laughing. Like he thought it was hilarious. And we were coming home from church as a family yesterday, and I was talking to him. I was like, Joshua, one of the things that's really impressive about you is your ability to laugh at yourself and your ability to give yourself grace. And I think that is so important. And the fact that he knows that at such an early age, that like he doesn't have to give, but that's the other thing too, is like me as a parent, I think parents put so much pressure on their children sometimes, and to just twist off the bottle cap a little bit and not put the pressure on a child to have to be perfect and have to perform, and that, hey, if they don't get it right this time, maybe they strike out in the game, and that's okay. There's been times, he's got 2 strikes on him, and I'll call time, walk over there and say, hey man, I don't care if you strike out or you hit a home run. I love you anyway. I'm proud of you. And just taking that down a notch for him. And I think that's important, but his ability to show himself some grace is important.
I love that. That's such a big part of, obviously, parenthood that I can now speak to, having a 2-year-old. Because I've thought about that whole grace thing, right? Giving ourselves grace as parents. Because, I've obviously put my parents on a pedestal, right? They could do no wrong. They were my heroes. They were my everything. Yet, looking back, there were plenty of things that they did or could have done differently or done better. And at the time, I gave them that grace. And, I still give them that grace, right? Even to this day, 22 plus years later, since they passed away, that grace is still there. But I think a lot of times we're willing to give others grace that we're not willing to give ourselves. And so I think it's really important, as you said, and I love the analogy with the bottle cap. I think that's great as the soda drinker here. I totally get it. Nothing better than a nice cold Coke Zero. Coca-Cola, come on now. I'm giving you free ad.
Yeah, we got to get some sponsorships
here. But, I think it's so important to also, while we give others grace, to give ourselves grace. Because I think a lot of times we feel that we've got to do things a certain way. And if we don't deliver on that, or we could have done this better, we can learn from it, but also provide ourselves grace in that process and know that we aren't going to be perfect. We're never going to be perfect. We're not broken, though. We're human. And we have to operate kind of in that mindset for others and for ourselves. And when grace is in the mix, I think that we can be far greater parents and advocates for our loved ones when we're giving grace and also giving ourselves grace in the process.
I do want to talk about your book. Is this something that was planned, or did this kind of like, did you always plan, I'm gonna be an author, I'm gonna write a book, or is this something that just kind of came, a little bit more organically?
Definitely organically, because never in a million years did I think I'd even have a story to put on paper that would fill 200 and some odd pages, whatever the book ended up being, 33 chapters, I believe. No, I never thought I'd be an author. Are you kidding me? And I don't even consider myself a writer. I'm a conversationalist. So I certainly want to give a shout out to Holland Webb, because he, helped me put pen to paper and take a lot of my stories and thoughts and everything. And we just, the process was crazy, because it's like I've got all these stories, but I'm like, how do they run together? How do you intertwine them? And that's where he was so masterful as a professional author that has written a lot. He spent a lot of time doing, various, short form writing and a couple books. He has a book of his own as well, but really helping. It's like just this ball of clay, and he and I just literally just worked on it, and ended up taking actually longer than we expected, and partially because I had a son in the midst of all of it. So I was like, I think we're going to delay the launch of this. I need some time to breathe. But never in a million years did I think that a book was in the works. And I think a lot of it is, how do I write a book? Like, I'm not a writer. Like, how do I fill these pages? What does this even look like? But as I sat down and started to really lean in, because for so many years, people are like, oh, you have an amazing story. You need to write a book. And I'm like, okay, like, how do I do that? Right. And so getting linked up with a publisher, Highbridge Media, they've just been phenomenal. Darren there really encouraged me to put the pen to paper and gave me all the resources to do this. And so, being an author, having that attached to my name is something I never in a million years thought would happen. And now that it's here, it's just like, such a pinch me moment. I literally got a delivery of 1,000 books. So I mentioned to you, I'm doing some stuff this summer for Alabama Power. And so I ordered like 1,000 books, and they're just literally piled up in front of my front door. We were out of town, and my in-laws were standing there, and they sent us a picture. And they're like, you got a delivery. And the poor Amazon guy, you just saw him like, oh, it's like so hot out. He's having to like hustle all those books. I wish I could have told him, just like back the car up to the front door. Here you go, buddy. But it was a surreal moment too, to see that, be like these books like are to me a gift. You know, I go and speak and do a lot of public speaking and whatnot, but like I give the 30-minute version, and now I have something to give to people, and something, the goal of the book, is to meet them where they're at, right? Because yes, it outlines the story and losing my parents to addiction and the shame and everything associated. And then it segues into, you know, some of the stories that I've now, compiled being on the sidelines over the years and the lessons learned. But the hope is that now I can meet them where they're at in their life. And, just being able to write this book, we named it Shatterproof. And it was something that I sat down with my team and Darren and Holland and, Gary, and we just all sat down, and really Shatterproof came to be because you think about life, it goes unscripted. So many times, it's like someone takes a baseball bat to your life, shatters it into a million pieces. But through the human spirit and through hard work and dedication and grit and resilience, we all have the ability to take those pieces, piece them back together, and create this beautiful foundation for a life filled with joy and purpose. And so that's really how Shatterproof came to be. And my hope is that could be a gift to other people to find their sideline shimmy and find joy in their lives and to become shatterproof.
But I know that I know you. If I know you, and I think I know you, that you don't want people to think of strength solely coming from you. You know that it's not all about Lauren. Your strength comes from the Lord, and I know you're a person of faith, and so how does that intertwine with your story, and how does that really shape who you are?
Yeah, faith is such a big part of it. When you were talking earlier about your faith and that journey where you were saved and then, kind of took 10 years off, right? I felt much of the same, and it wasn't that I quit believing. It wasn't that I grew up going to church. I was always a strong believer. I was the encourager in the family, even when things would get challenging. Oh, come on, let's go to church, say our prayers. Everything's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. But when I lost both of my parents, I never stopped believing in God, but what I did is I leaned out. So instead of leaning in and saying, take me by the hand and carry me, Lord, it was kind of like, oh, I don't know if I trust you. I don't know if I trust you, because I was angry. Like, it's crazy when you deal with grief and you go through that process, like anger is just bubbling. And for me, I just had to kind of walk through that part. And I always talk about this. It was then that I carried you. That poem, Footprints in the Sand, was like my staple, like my foundation. Going through gymnastics, any hardships, just during time, remembering that those footprints in the sand, it was then that I carried you when you only see one set of footprints. And I had to really start leaning into that again and recognizing that God was carrying me all along. And similar to your story, he was sharpening me for this next chapter in life, much like he was sharpening you for your next chapter in life, giving you the tools, giving you the skill set, and kind of going astray, saying, look, come back to me. I'm right here. I've been here all along. And I think that's what I've recognized in this process. And I'm so grateful because my walk in faith has blossomed in so many ways. And I'll even credit, my husband, meeting him and us doing that together and wanting to raise our son in a household that is led by the Lord and to be servant leaders, because I truly believe that's what we're here on this earth to do. And my hope is that book, Shatterproof, along with, just being a voice, can be a testimony and also an avenue for other people to have the courage and strength to lead the same life. And I use the mantra, fall in love with your story. So, I've learned to fall in love with my story, and my hope is that other people can do the same.
Well, that is awesome. And listen, I really appreciate you working us into your schedule. I know you got to get on a plane here to see it. So.
Well, life has been crazy. I have not been grounded for very long. And again, it's the off season. I'm supposed to be on the ground, chilling. It has been the furthest thing from chilling, but that's okay. We're good. Life is good. Just staying busy, but staying intentional and just grateful.
Good. Well, have a good summer, and let's do part 2.
Let's do part 2.
Part 2. Let's do it. Yeah.
We got a lot to cover. We covered a lot. We still got a lot to cover.
Yeah.
So
there'll be people that are pining for more.
Pining for more.
Yes.
I love it. For those epiphanies.
Yes, many of them.
From Al.
Yes.
Love it.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.